Hello my friends, to your channel True Crimes. Between 1976 and 1977, the suburbs of Oakland County, Michigan became the site of a murderer who later became known as the Oakland County Child Killer. In this video, we show you the horrific killing of 4 children and their bodies being placed in the snow. To this day, authorities in Oakland County remain baffled and the killer remains at large. The first victim of the Oakland Child Killer. Mark Stebbins was the first official victim of the Oakland County Child Killer and was kidnapped on February 15, 1976. Mark Stebbins, 12, was planning to become a military man. Mark was a 7th grader at Lincoln High School and was described by his mother, Ruth Stebbins, as a sweet child. Mark was last seen on February 15, 1976 in Ferndale, Michigan. Mark and his mother were at the American Association Hall where they were holding a billiards tournament. Mark asked his mother for money to visit the local hobby store, but she refused because she had already given him his allowance. Mark didn't seem bothered, but asked if he could walk home to watch a movie. His mother agreed. Mark left the American Society Hall around noon to walk the 3/4 of a mile to his home on East Saratoga Street. Later that day, Ruth called home to check on Mark but got no answer. When I arrived home just before 9 p.m., I found the house empty. When Mark did not arrive home by 11 p.m., his mother became very afraid. She called the police and reported Mark was missing. The cops stated that they had not seen a kidnapping in Ferndale in 10 years, and assumed that Mark was out with friends or perhaps on the run, and would show up soon. Although he was considered a fugitive, police conducted a massive search in Ferndale, checking abandoned buildings, dumpsters and anywhere else they could think of. Ruth was terrified. She stayed up all night waiting for her son. I was hearing voices and thinking it was Mark, Ruth said. In the following days, I prepared 3 places at the table in the hope that he would come home. Mark's body was found 4 days later, on February 19. Businessman Mark Buttigimer found Mark's body in the snow in an Oakdale parking lot. Oakdale is located a little more than 2 hours northeast of Ferndale. At first, the businessman thought it was a statue in the snow. But when he looked closely, he saw that it was the body of a child. Mark's body had been carefully placed there, as if he had been sleeping near a dumpster. Police said it appeared he had been dead for less than 8 hours. Police at the scene noticed cuts and bruises that led them to believe he had been beaten and tied up. Some reports say there was a ligature mark around Mark's neck, other reports say he was strangled. It has also been reported that he was sexually assaulted by his killer. Strangely, Mark was washed by his killer and had his nails done. His clothes were also washed and ironed. Then he carefully laid down into position as if he were asleep. Given the reality, something went wrong at the beginning of the investigation. Police removed Mark's body before the county coroner arrived. His body was also taken to the Southfield police station instead of the morgue. In addition, the police removed Mark's clothing, destroying and corrupting any existing evidence. At the time, police worked with Dr. Bruce Danto, a psychiatrist who suggested returning to the disposal site to lure the killer back to the scene. The police did as the doctor suggested and placed a statue of a child the size of Mark wearing the exact same clothes as Mark at the location where the body was found. However, police found a funeral service card at the spot where Mark was laid out, a taunt left by the killer indicating he had attended the funeral. Many people attended the funeral and Ruth had a terrifying memory. "I didn't know everyone who came," Ruth said. "Maybe I even shook the killer's hand." In the wake of Mark's disappearance, Ruth became desperate and became so depressed that she could not work and ended up on welfare. Life wasn't what it used to be. Before her death in 2011, Ruth told reporters that every time she heard about a child being murdered, her memory went back to the day they found Mark. "Every time a child like Mark is killed, the same thing happens to me. I still think about that every day." The second victim, Jill Robinson. Jill Robinson, 12, was a young girl who grew up with deep fear. She had nightmares in which she imagined a man was going to shoot her. "I know it's all bullshit, but it feels like someone's going to shoot me, she told her mother, Carol Robinson. In fact, the fear was so persistent that her parents took her to see a child psychologist. Jill was a sweet, precocious child who was beyond her years and was known to defy her mother at times. 3 nights before Christmas, December 22, 1976, her mother was preparing dinner. Jill got into an argument with her mother over making cookies. Jill was very smart, said Ted Rudensky, a Robinson family friend. She had what we might call a very variable pre-adolescent nature. In an interview with Crime Discovery, Carol emotionally recalls saying to her daughter, "Well, Jill, if you don't like being here, why don't you take your coat with you and stand in the front yard and think about it? When you feel like talking about it, come back inside the house." It's a phrase most parents say, but it's one Carol will regret for the rest of her life. After the argument, Jill packed her blue bag with cosmetics and a blanket. She left her home in Royal Oak, Michigan, and rode her bicycle down Woodward Avenue. When Jill didn't come back inside, and her mother couldn't find her, she called the police. At first, police thought she had run away from home. They assumed that Jill had gone to her friend's house, perhaps even to her father's house, since Jill's parents were divorced. However, it never got there. She was last seen at 7:30 p.m. at the Tiny Team Hobby Center. Because police believed Jill had run away, the case was not being treated as a kidnapping or missing child case. There was no huge search for the little girl. Although her bike was found behind the hobby shop the night she disappeared, police did not appear concerned. This Christmas, Jill's gifts sat untouched under the tree while her family searched for them. On December 26, everything changed. Jill's body was found by a motorist along Interstate 75 in Troy, Michigan, about 20 minutes from her home. As in the case of Mark Stebbins, her body appears to have been arranged by the killer. The only difference was that Jill was shot in the face with a 12-gauge shotgun, splitting her head in half. Her clothes were completely on her with her bag still on her back. Autopsy results revealed that she had died from shock and bleeding, rather than from the wound itself. As if to taunt the police, Jill's body was placed neatly in the snow in full view of the Troy Police Department. Her clothes were clean and ironed. The autopsy revealed that Jill had not been sexually assaulted. Once again, the police handled the case inappropriately, treating Jill as if she had run away, and valuable evidence was almost certainly lost. Additionally, the county sheriff's department was not called to the scene. To this day, cops are confused about why Jill was shot when all the other victims died of strangulation or bleeding. Did she fight and then this horrific murder happened to her? Or did she reveal to her disturbed abductor her constant fear of being shot? Tom Robinson spent years angry at police for their mishandling of his daughter's case. They don't respond to a runaway situation for 48 hours, but it wasn't a runaway girl, it was an angry child, who ran out of the house and was picked up by a naughty person, Tom said. The family is still reeling from Jill's death. It's the little things that affect you, Carol said. The hardest thing is when someone asks how many kids I have, and I automatically say 3. I can't believe there are only 2 now. The third victim, Christine Marie. Christine Marie Mihalets, 10, disappeared 7 days after Jill Robinson's body was found. On January 2, 1977, Christine was kidnapped in broad daylight while walking to a 7-Eleven store near her home in Berkeley, Michigan. Another child has disappeared. Oakland County entered a state of panic, horrified by the truth about the killer lurking in their community. Christine's mother, Deborah Jarvis, relives that day constantly. Deborah said, "Chris was distracted so she asked if she could go to the store to buy a magazine. It wasn't usual for her to cross 12 Mile Road, but she had gone shopping for me earlier, so she agreed. I explained to her how to go, to wait for the traffic light, and told her to hurry. She promised me she would do it." When Christine didn't return home after 30 minutes, Deborah called the police. For 20 days, Deborah was consumed with anxiety. Deborah kept a monitor around the clock waiting for her daughter to return. She was in the news begging for her daughter's return and raised $17,000 to offer as a reward. None of these attempts were of any use. Christine's body was found by a postal worker named Jerome Wozni in a cul-de-sac about 16 minutes from her home. When the cops arrived at the scene, they discovered that Christine's body had been carefully laid out just like the other victims. They were carried as a parent carries a child, with one arm under their head and the other under their leg, and then carefully placed in the snow. The killer closed her eyes and supported her arms. Then he covered it with snow, pressing it gently and leaving his handprints in another bizarre and gruesome murder scene. It was later verified that Christine had been strangled, but police would not reveal what was used. Police also said there were no obvious signs of sexual assault. However, experts agree that it is more likely that he engaged in some type of sexual activity with her. Like the last two victims, her body and clothes were washed. Amazingly, the autopsy showed that Christine's kidnapper killed her less than 24 hours before she was discovered, meaning the killer held her captive for 20 days. For Deborah, life was never the same. She describes her life as a living hell, but somehow feels strangely relieved to know that the killer did not kill Christine outright. Kristen was a lovely child, Deborah said. That's why whoever took her kept her for so long. He enjoyed her company. At least that's what we told ourselves, and I'd rather not think otherwise. The fourth victim, Timothy King. Timothy King, age 11, was born to Barry and Marion King, the youngest of 4 siblings. He had 2 brothers, Mark and Chris, and a sister named Kathy. The King family lived in Birmingham, Michigan, in an upscale neighborhood. Timothy was a kid who loved playing hockey and baseball. His favorite pastimes were cruising around the neighborhood on his skateboard and visiting parks where he played sports. He had a job delivering newspapers and was a responsible young boy who rarely got into trouble. On the day Timothy disappeared, his parents had gone out to dinner with a client from his father's law firm and figured Timothy could take care of himself for a few hours. Because he was sitting with other kids in the neighborhood, Marion recalled. We decided he could take care of himself. And we weren't gone far or long. Around 7:30 p.m., Timothy decided he wanted to buy candy at a local pharmacy about 3 blocks away. He borrowed 30 cents from his sister and told her to leave the door open for him. With skateboard in hand, he headed to the store on Maple Street. At around 8 p.m., Timothy is understood to have left through the pharmacy's back entrance, which opens into a car park shared with a supermarket. This was the last time Timothy was seen alive. This time there were witnesses. 2 people reported seeing Timothy in the parking lot with a man with curly hair and a mustache. The man was standing next to a blue Gremlin with white stripes on the sides. Eventually, police asked every Gremlin owner in Oakland County. In 1977, in a New York Times article, the task force provided an analysis of the killer and described him as a person of above-average intelligence and good education, a white man with a passion for cleanliness who did not engage in drug or alcohol abuse. Maybe it was a person in a position of authority that the children trusted, and a schedule that gave him freedom. The killer likely lived and worked in Oakland County, given his familiarity with the area. With panic in full swing in Oakland County, police knew they needed to get Timothy home before it was too late. As the killer held his victims captive for a few days before killing them, the police knew that time was essential. However, it took 2 days for the police to release a photo of the suspect. Pleading for Timothy's return, Barry, Timothy's father, wrote an open letter to the killer that was published on the front page of the Detroit News, pleading with the kidnapper to release Timothy unharmed. Unfortunately, this effort had no effect. In another letter, his mother begged for his safe return and Marion assured that when Tim returned, he would be served his favorite dish from KFC. The family offered a reward and did everything they could to find him. Late in the evening of March 22, 1977, 2 young men were driving a car and spotted the body of a child in a shallow ditch. The body was found 300 feet south of 8 Mile Street in Livonia, just 20 minutes from his home. His body was arranged, his skateboard placed next to his body, and his clothes were clean and ironed. An autopsy showed Timothy had been sexually assaulted with a foreign object, had rope marks on both his wrists and ankles, and had been nearly strangled 6 hours before he was found. Amazingly, the medical examiner's report showed that Timothy had eaten a meal of fried chicken before he was killed. The killer kept Tim alive for 6 days and brought him his favorite meal before killing him. The crime stopped after Tim was killed, and the police assumed that the killer had left the area, had been arrested for another crime, or had died. Over the years, police have identified numerous suspects, some of whom were child abusers. They even reopened the grave of one of the suspects, but all did not lead to results. Many mistakes were made in each case. The system fails to protect all children. If the killer is alive, he has lived among us for decades, and may have killed others.